Hello, my name's Les Back, and welcome to this edition of Street Signs. I'm here in Parliament Hill at Parliament Hill Lido to attend the book launch for Sophie Watson's new wonderful book, City Water Matters. I'm hoping to speak to Sophie shortly, but it's interesting. I think the life of cities seems different if we think about the place of water within it and think about urban life through water itself. Well, I'm here with Sophie Watson. Congratulations on the book, Sophie. Wonderful occasion, a perfect place to launch the book here at the Lido. I wonder if you could just say how you came to write the book and how you approached it.
Sure, lovely to talk to you too. I came at it really mainly through thinking about public space, because what I've been working on before was different sorts of publics in the city and where they are. And I thought that this was a really fantastic public space because it brings together people from all sorts of parts of London, all sorts of class, race, age, backgrounds, and everyone kind of mixes together. And there's something about taking your clothes off together. I go to the women's changing room and it's absolutely hilarious, like the women sing and they literally sing in the changing rooms. And there's people there who are, maybe 80, there's people there who are in their 30s, there's people there who are vote for Labour, people there who voted for Brexit, and somehow once you've got your clothes off, it all sort of manages itself very well. And then when somebody's ill or something, they send a get well card, and I had my birthday last week and they all signed a card for me. So I think this is a wonderful way in which water brings people together.
Yeah, so it becomes like a meeting place, and also something that people do together that sort of strips away some of the social aspects of life, but also brings other aspects to the fore.
I think that's right. I mean, that's exactly the point, that it makes for new social connections. And I think increasingly as I came to write the book, I came to think about the idea that water makes different kinds of publics, different kinds of social connections, different kinds of public spaces. And often you just don't notice them, but they're there in the city, bringing it alive and making it really livable.
It's interesting that, a place like this Lido at Parliament Hill, I bet there are people in the local area who don't even know it's here.
Well, indeed. I mean, people came tonight and they were absolutely flabbergasted, I mean, it just looks amazing with the sun going down over the water and it's sort of crystal blue shining in the light. And goodness, I've driven past here hundreds of times and I never even knew it was here.
So one of the aspects of the book is really about everyday life and public space, but it has a very broad scope, doesn't it? Could you just talk about some of the other themes that you ended up, realising that you needed to address?
Well, it was great fun because I addressed all sorts of things that I hadn't ever thought about before. So I thought about public toilets. And public toilets are fascinating places because actually you need them far more than you think in cities, and they're being eroded now. A lot of them are being turned into nail bars and pubs and things like that. And that's fun for the hipsters of the city, but it's not so fun for the older people who maybe wouldn't come into the city centre if they didn't know they could have a pee somewhere, or for women with kids who need to take their children to loo very often. And they're spaces that are being eroded. They're a public space, a water space that's being eroded. So I looked at that, and I looked at another example was I looked at the river. We thought about the river as a place up until maybe 20 or 30 years ago. It was sort of, everyone looked at the Thames and it was full of, dross, and nobody could swim in there, and we weren't using it much for transport. And when the containerisation happened, the docks kind of went into decline. And in the last 20 or 30 years, it's really come alive, I think. Now we've got a passenger service down the river, all sorts of spaces near the river are water spaces. People have even started swimming there and living beside it. And I think the water brings the city to life.
I mean, obviously, the Thames and London. London is your sort of reference point, isn't it,
yes,
throughout the book? And I just wondered if you think you came to know London differently through its river and its water, actually.
I completely came to know London differently. One of the things I became alert to was the way in which there are traces of water through the city. So the last chapter of the book, I just put in a bunch of photographs. One of the photographs that represents the way in which the city's changed is the Thames steps. 100 years ago, there were steps down to the Thames all the way along, and this is where the boats used to come in to passenger, the wherries, I think they were called, where they came across and brought people from one side of the river to the other, because we didn't have that many bridges until fairly recently. And those Thames steps were places where people boarded the boats. So, once you start, and then, for example, horse troughs. I took a photograph of a horse trough, if you look around the city, you'll see horse troughs everywhere, and this is the time when people used to come into the city with their horses. So you can see traces of water everywhere in the city. Yeah, we are 85% water, and we need water to live. And indeed, many parts of the world, it's very hard for people to find water just to live. We're rather privileged. So I worked on this project with Thames Water, and they were introducing smart meters into the city to try and reduce people's water use. But you can't kind of force people to change their habits. What you need to think about is how people use water differently, again, according to age, gender and ethnicity. And I found something really interesting, which was that the African communities, we were in Thames Mead doing some of this research, actually were very sparing with their use of water. And what they do is what they call a bucket wash. So they soap themselves all over, and then they tip a bucket on their head, sitting in the bath. And this goes back to their kind of experience of water as being very difficult to get hold of. Young girls spend far too long in the shower. You're supposed to do a 4-minute shower, but if you're 18-year-old going to a nightclub, you're in there for 25 minutes kind of lathering yourself with soap. So, you've got to address these issues. People think about water differently, they use water differently.
So there's a lot of deeply ethical choices, and they might not be conscious ones, but they're certainly habitual ones.
They are. I mean, I love baths, for example, and I've done all this research and I still haven't given up having baths. I mean, it's, we're very sort of embedded in our water practices, if you like. We just don't think about them.
Fascinating. Can I just ask you if there were... It's a very human story, actually, at the same time as having a very ambitious sort of structural understanding of the place of water in social life, I suppose. Were there things that surprised you?
Yeah, I mean, the thing that probably surprised me most was the way in which religious communities have different uses of water. And I looked particularly at the Muslim community and the Jewish community. And the Muslim community, it's very challenging for that community if they want to practice their prayers, because they're supposed to wash themselves 5 times a day before they pray. We know about that. Most people know there needs to be a space for Muslim people to pray, but they don't know there needs to be a space to wash. And it's quite complex, the kind of washing rituals you have to go through before you can make a prayer. And in workplaces, many places, they don't provide water specially. So a lot of the Muslim participants I talked to would go into the public toilet washroom of where they worked, and they'd start sloshing water all around because they had to wash their feet and their face in certain kinds of ways. And that produced a lot of difficulties for them, embarrassment on their part, but often antagonism from fellow employees who didn't understand why they were sloshing water around. I found it really interesting that, every different religious and ethnic group uses water differently. I'll give you another example. Hindu people often put their ashes into the Thames. And it's become commercialised now, so you can actually hire a boat which will help you take your votive ashes down the Thames and let them go. So, there are all these things going on we just don't know anything about.
Yeah, so in a way, putting water at the centre of our attention just alerts us to a whole range of different connections to culture, social life, and indeed history.
It's true. The history is fabulous. I mean, I'm not a historian, but I always loved delving back into history. And I loved looking at the Mayhew book on London, which was written, I think, 1880 or 1890, something like that. And there's these people who are called mudlarkers. Well, at that time, they were collecting what they could out of the mud. The very poor, mostly women were mudlarkers, and they were collecting coins and whatnot that had got into the mud. Now mudlarking's become a sort of trendy pastime, and people go down there and they find wonderful old sort of, Tudor belts and goodness knows what by raking around in the mud in the city. So it's a practice that's changed from being something of necessity to something which is a pleasure.
Amazing. And you interviewed some of those mudlarkers with their metal detectors.
I did. I interviewed a woman who'd actually worked in the banking sector and earned a lot of money. At the age of 40, she suddenly thought, what's my life about? And now she's an artist in Greenwich, and she goes mudlarking 3 days a week. And she said to me, I'm completely mad, but I love it. I love the solitude of being down by the water's edge and raking around in the mud. And she'd found like a Tudor belt with sort of, I don't know, jewels on it or something like that. If you find things that are good like that, you have to take them to the Museum of London and have them registered.
Right. What would you like readers to take from this book? I mean, it's a very fond book. It's a very affectionate portrait of London in many ways. But what would you like us to take from it?
I think it's, sort of quite a lot of things, actually. I mean, I think it's about ultimately caring for the environment. I mean, water is, the main source of life. I'm worried about what the lack of water is going to mean in the future for countries and for, movements of people, because already people are moving from lands where there is no water to other places. So it's going to be a stress point. I think people need to know that about water, but they also, in sort of first world, if you like, countries, need to recognise how important it is to cities. We take water for granted. I mean, you turn on the tap and you can wash your face or drink it. So I'd like people to sort of, in a way, care for water more, I suppose.
That's a wonderful place to end. Well, congratulations. It's been a wonderful night. And it's a beautiful book.
Thank you so much, Les.